Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for spending this afternoon with us. On behalf of the South African Education Research Association, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar series. As you know, our annual conference face-to-face engagement has been cancelled for this year due to the COVID-19 disease. And in its place, we have invited SIGs of the South African Education Research Association to do seminars across the 6 months ending in December this year. So we've had several webinars thus far. Some of the presenters were Dr. Lamoli Shatweya from UKZN, Dr. Lester Bryan Shower, Professor Surya Murthy Maestri, Dr. Zayed Wahid, and others. I'm not going to take this opportunity to introduce the session, and I will leave this to the facilitator, who is Professor Chris Reddy. I just want to welcome you to the webinar series and hope that you'll participate in all the sessions that we do offer over the next few months that's remaining. We also want to alert you to the annual general meeting that we will advertise shortly, which will take place in October. But further information about that will be given to you via email. I'd like to then hand over to Professor Petra Dupree, who is the SIG coordinator for the Curriculum Studies SIG. Petra?
Thank you, Prof. Ramathan. Appreciate it. And welcome, colleagues. As Labi's indicated, this is the third session that we have in this series of webinars that we are presenting in the absence of the physical contact session conference later this year. We really welcome you all, and this is a very established SIG with lots of activities going on, and we are really pleased for everybody who logged in at this moment. It seems like 96 people, which is a record for us in terms of our webinars. So you are all welcomed, and I'm not going to take too much of your time. I just want to ask you to write down, scribble somewhere there on the paper that our next session will be on the 7th of October, where we will speak about post-humanism and curriculum studies. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Professor Chris Reddy from Stellenbosch University to introduce our speakers for today. And yes, enjoy every moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dupree. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to the session that has just been introduced to you. I just want to touch quickly, before we get to our actual title. I think it's a well-known view, right? Maybe erroneous, maybe not, that the architecture of teacher education programs has remained fundamentally unchanged for a long time. Some people say for more than 100 years. With most teacher education programs having three major aspects, if I can call it that. Foundational knowledge, which would include, knowledge around psychology, sociology, history, philosophy of education, subject matter knowledge or content knowledge, pedagogical strategies, and this is topped off, as it is said, by a period of practicum or school-based experience or work-integrated learning. And work-integrated learning often forms quite a big credit value, or it takes up quite a percentage of the credit value of teacher education programs. And it's logistically very demanding, and also is subject to conceptual shifts, context, and so on and so on. So for our webinar today, our focus is on the work-integrated learning, and the title for today is Work-Integrated Learning for Student Teachers, a research-led approach during COVID-19 and beyond, I should say, before and beyond. We have three academics or scholars today who will be doing the presentations, and they represent three SIGs in a sense of SAERA. That will be the pre-service teacher education, curriculum studies, and the knowledge building SIG. Our colleagues have been engaged in teacher education research for a long time, and they are well known in this area of research. So our first speaker today is Professor Robinson, Maureen Robinson from Stellenbosch University. She is a professor of curriculum studies and an ex-dean of the faculty of Stellenbosch and CPUT. Lee Rosniak, associate professor, deputy head of school, Wits School of Education. And Carol Bertram, associate professor at UKZN School of Education. So our first speaker, I'll just give a title. No, hang on. I just want to announce quickly. We'll allow all three presenters to do their presentations, and we'll take questions at the end of the third presenter. Questions and discussion, comments, and so on. Please feel free to use the chat box to type up questions or points of clarification or anything you might want to us to latch onto at the end of the presentations. Okay, so part one, this is a three-part presentation. Maureen will do enduring issues in research on work-integrated learning. Maureen, I'd like to hand over to you without further ado.
Thank you, Chris. Let me do the screen sharing story and hope it works. Something happening? Okay.
Yes, it's there.
Okay, is it all fine?
Yep.
Yeah. So thanks very much, Chris, and Labby and everybody else involved in the SIG. We do appreciate this opportunity. Now, my topic, as Chris mentioned, is enduring issues in research on work-integrated learning, and I look at some conceptual and practical issues about the purpose, form, and substance. Of course, having taken on this topic for 10 minutes, it requires probably, you know, like the summarizing of 3 encyclopedias. So it's quite a challenge, but I do my best. What I started off by looking at South African writings on teacher education, you know, with some of the colleagues who I know, even on this webinar, I have, you know, we've done a couple of literature reviews here and there. And so I try to encapsulate what some of the themes are that are happening in research. And just it's a bit embarrassing because obviously there are many more themes that are listed here. So please focus on the etc. at the bottom. But if you look at the writings on teacher education, generally speaking, in South Africa, we see stuff on social political goals like, you know, for example, democracy and citizenship, etc. Curriculum design, pedagogy, teaching and learning, the whole theory practice story, lots on partnerships, situational learning, which is of course where the practicum comes in, student preparedness, student emotions, there's more like the disciplines, the phases, etc. And of course, many subtopics within those fields. But I think what we're interested here is the specific research issues on work-integrated learning. So again, a bit of a potted summary. We find there's a lot written on the relationship between the coursework and the field work. And of course, as we all know, many critiques of what people perceive as a poor relationship. Quite a bit on curriculum coherence across the program, within the program, across the 4 years, progression, sequencing, etc. The relationship between modules. The fact that students might experience a program as disjointed, a few articles on assessment, and I think Lee has done some good work here looking at the nature of assessment of work-integrated learning. You know, what you assess drives how students behave. And so if we talk about professionalism and we talk about development and then we only assess for production and performance, then it obviously drives certain behaviors. University school collaboration and attempts at that in all kinds of ways. The issue of diversity, I think, comes up a lot in our country, also internationally, by the way. I think what's nice about some of the writings in South Africa is the emphasis on rurality. Yeah, there's quite a bit on that. Issues of mentoring. There are people who have written about specific programs. They've written about relationships. They've written about mentor training, different programs, evaluating these programs, etc. Technology comes up, not as much as one would think, and I actually think that this is a field that is going to develop more in terms of research, because obviously the conditions are such that this has come much more to the fore. And another one, if you look at the writings on work integrated learning in South Africa, is on the policy proposals, mainly around the teaching schools and the professional practice schools, which has been on the table for quite some years, not getting much off the table, but so be it. So those are some of the themes that we find in the articles and the writings on teacher education. If one looks at the sort of general impression of these articles, this is really my personal view. I think you get a lot of good conceptual and political work. The political is almost by definition part of how we live. And so we get, people looking at democratic citizenship, social justice, social cohesion, service learning, etc. And these are all intentions that people have with their programs. We usually find that these are linked to suggestions for various kinds of pedagogies. People are quite keen on narrative, on conversations. Reflection comes quite a lot. Pedagogical reasoning, which Lee will talk about later. So these are all suggestions that are made for how one might achieve the particular goals. I think that there's not enough written on systemic approaches to work integrated learning in our country, linked to curriculum coherence or dialogue across subjects. There's some reference in the writings to policies and systems that promote and constrain. And I think what's a bit sad in a certain sense is that most of the writings on policies and systems that promote and constrain refer more to the constraining than to the promoting. And if you read into the articles, you'll find people talking about the constraining elements of school cultures, poor mentoring, rigid school structures, etc. But I'm happy to say there's also quite a lot on the positives of the work integrated learning or the teaching practice, where people emphasize student-teacher agency, enthusiasm, emotions. And I think this is really important because, as Chris said, it forms a major part of our teacher education program. And if we are sending our students out from their program without that sense of enthusiasm based on their time in the workplace, then I think we are seriously losing out on the kind of motivation that is needed for the workplace. I think an important point here is that much of the research that's written about is small samples. And this kind of stands to reason. A lot of people doing self-study, it's often one university or one program. And clearly there is a need for much more work across the system. So I think that one of the things that appeals to me about this type of work is that it's what others have called action-oriented inquiry. So when we are looking at work integrated learning or school-based practicum, it's really not just about what's in the head, but it's about the learning to do. And this creates a whole new set of dynamics. And so we're talking about the power and the challenges of researching not only how curriculum is conceptualized, which is kind of easy to do, you can do some kind of discourse analysis or whatever, not only how it's implemented, but also how it's experienced. There are many players in this. And what makes it more interesting, I think, is we're working across boundaries, across school university boundaries. And I really like activity theory within this. I mean, I could talk about that, but not now, where we have, different worlds that students have to move across as they learn to do. Now, I think it's important to realize that our curriculum intentions and structures are informed by conceptual models. And I've listed them there. I don't know that there's time to go through this. I forgot to switch on my timer. But you can see there as you glance through it, that there are, if I just whiz through it, different models of how we understand teacher education. The one is a master apprentice. We observe and model the expert teacher. The applied sciences, we say we're going to learn the theory and apply it to practice, which of course the students always critique and says it's irrelevant. Competency, it's performance-based. We see what they can do. Their identity, we link it to their lived experiences. We understand that their personal biographies are extremely important. The reflective model, which many people say they do, not necessarily that they are doing, where we all know drawing on resources to look at problems. And a social justice orientation, schooling and power and hierarchy, etc. So these are some models that underpin what we do. Of course, they are models. Most programs would consist of a combination of these. But I think what's relevant here is that all these models are getting new permutations in this COVID era. So if we look at the master apprentice, modeling a teacher, what are we modeling at this point? Or what are our students modeling? There's curriculum trimming. But probably that goes with it is a kind of teaching and learning that is involved with curriculum stashing, stash it into their heads as fast as possible in the shortest possible time. So what are our students actually modeling at this point? It would be really good to know. If we talk about the applied scientists, theory, learning theory, we have new scenarios of practice that we may not have theory for. And so we have to develop perhaps new conceptual categories. Competency model, there's new skills that students require, unanticipated, pedagogies that they were not familiar with. And if you follow the WhatsApp of our PGCE students, you'll see the stress levels. We've only got 10 minutes to formative assessment. How do I do it? So there's all this unanticipated stuff. Teacher identity, I think a whole new world of anxiety and the demands of pastoral care that reflect on teachers' own sense of themselves. And the reflective model, what resources are we drawing on? We are really walking the road while building it. And the model of social justice comes to the fore, and many people have written about it, that we see how this period has really epitomized the stark patterns of inequality and how we see the very, very close relationship between home and school life. So I just thought it's useful to put those models into the COVID period and to see how new scenarios and new permutations are emerging. And then I think, this is probably my last slide, I think. There are new questions that have been brought to the fore around very central concepts in teacher education and work integrated learning. So the whole notion of the situated nature of practice, where we talk about people learning in context. We talk about workplace learning and we talk about authentic contexts. Obviously, a school is an authentic context. And we talk about knowledge being embedded in the context, in that school context, and learning being facilitated through teachers and others. Something's happening.
Keep going, Maureen.
Sharing, interaction, common knowledge, negotiating, and meaning. Sorry, I don't know what that
Excuse me, Maureen. Can
Yeah?
I just ask all participants to put off their microphones?
Thanks. So I was talking about the situated nature of practice and the authentic context. And obviously the authentic context that we're working with now is a new one, and there are new forms of common knowledge. The second concept, which Labby and I have actually been trying to do some work on, is that of knowledge infrastructure. And by this, it meant the conditions that sustain how work happens. And in this particular article, they talk about the social and the material conditions. So the knowledge infrastructure of the COVID period now is very different. The conditions within which our students are learning is very different to what they would normally have been used to. The relationships between people are probably very tense. The physical and technical organization is completely different. Class size, technology, remote learning. That whole knowledge infrastructure has changed, and perhaps we would need to have new ways of looking at it. And then the final concept which I really like is that of embodiment, where they talk about felt experience of learning to teach. Where teaching isn't just knowing how to do things or knowing the that, but it's also about oneself, how one feels, your feelings of preparedness, it's your motivation, it's your emotions. And it would be really interesting to know how young student teachers are feeling at the moment about themselves as teachers in relation to the others and the contexts within which they sit. So what I've tried to do is highlight some conceptual categories, some theoretical pointers, and some research issues, and show how these are all really, I suppose, coming up in new ways in the COVID period. And I'll end off by saying, and I think this will lead us into the next session, that in the midst of all these challenges, and you know what I like about this picture here is there are no kids there, it's empty. In the midst of the challenges, we do find that there's creative thinking, teamwork, and innovations that are emerging. So colleagues, with that, I'll end my session, and Chris or Petra, I'm not quite sure, I'll hand back to you. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Maureen, for the overview and the pointers that you highlighted in the presentation. I think we'll go straight on to Lee. Okay, Lee, you can, while Lee is loading her presentation, Lee's going to talk to us about the development of the module, Teacher Choices in Action. Okay, Lee, over to you. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Chris. So I've called this one Averting a National Crisis, Addressing a National Concern, and it picks up from where Maureen has left off. So Maureen has mentioned a few of these, but I wanted to draw attention to a couple of small-scale case studies that have been particularly influential in helping a group of us think through what isn't working in work-based learning, because it's so diverse. It's so dependent on the combination of this student in this context with this class and this teacher, and what could be a really productive context for one student might be a very disruptive context for another. And what might be really appropriate for one stage of their development might be disastrous, either too early or too late. And so the complexities of work-based learning and the scale makes it so difficult, but also makes the experience so variable from one student to the next. And I just wanted to draw out some particular findings. The research that has shown that although some students get a lot of experience, there's high absenteeism by mentor teachers. And so they have experience in the school, but that experience is not often mediated by an expert teacher who's giving feedback or who's explaining their practice. There are in very established schools with histories of 10 years of mentorship and learnerships, feedback, when the feedback's actually given, it's a whole lot of tips. Do this, stand there, don't do this, don't do that, without actually the reasons. And classrooms are such busy spaces that very often teachers are so exhausted that they haven't got the time to sit and really open up the reasons for their decisions. And so it becomes a list of tips and do's and don'ts. Armin and Ramrathan's work on when students are taken to diverse contexts, it disrupts their normalized model of schooling that they became used to and they're familiar with, but at the same time it provoked very mechanical responses to those diversities when done very early. superficial discussion of teachers' choices. We've already spoken about that. The idea of lesson work as paperwork. This is the kind of the admin work you do. So lesson planning is not seen as the embodiment of teacher thinking, but rather kind of the paperwork you do for your lesson because your university requires it, not because it has value in and of itself. Reflections that focus entirely on what are you feeling, what did you experience, what went right, what went wrong, what can you do better, and it actually makes a break between anything that's happening in the university coursework, as opposed to reflection prompts that take the students from their experiences and feelings in the classroom and, you know, what questions does this make you think of the university coursework, or what have you learned in your university coursework that could help you think through the dilemmas in this, where there could be that connection, there isn't. And analysis of teacher assessment rubrics that, you know, has the student used a resource? Has the student done group work? Has the student answered questions, where it becomes a tick box? Yes, they have. Yes, they have. And it's a compliance that as long as I do these particular actions, that's good enough. So all these kind of give a sense that in some places, work-based learning might be really an administrative endeavor of placing students in schools where it's convenient for them to go to and hoping for the best, that perhaps good things happen there, perhaps they get a good mentor who's able to perhaps give them some sort of explanation of practice. But really, at its worst, work integrated learning could be nothing more than accumulating classroom hours with very, very little value. And that's one of the things that we wanted to address. The other thing that Maureen touched on is that the nature of teacher knowledge is in boxes. There's this kind of knowledge and that kind of knowledge and so on. And even Chris referred to it, you know, your content knowledge, your psychology knowledge, your philosophy knowledge, and so on, your pedagogy knowledge. And basically, even Mr. Tech requires that a program like the B.Ed or the PGCE has a particular knowledge mix, and that knowledge mix, different courses attend to different boxes of knowledge, and basically what Maiten calls the segmental nature of learning. At the end of it, the students have parts. They know about child's development, they know about the content knowledge, they know about the PCK for teaching their subject and so on, but not necessarily bringing these together in the logic of practice. And there's an expectation expressed by Mr. Tech that all these things will fuse together in the moments of practice, but actually our research and my research with a group of fourth year students from WITS show that only about 70% of them are actually seeing the links between the various parts of their coursework. And for the rest of them, they're still seeing their teacher education in silo. And it reminds me of what Hoban said about when you have teacher knowledge built up in cumulative ways in modules, and the course is a collection of modules. The courses can run in isolation with very, very little interaction or relationship between courses and between coursework and schools, and such approach could be difficult for students to make their own connections. So those were some of the research concerns, empirical and conceptual. And when the immediate crisis of the COVID pandemic came and we realized that there was going to be a problem in taking the thousands and thousands of students that we have and putting them in school-based placements, JET Education Services had a researchers boot camp, which gave the challenge, can you think of using this crisis as an opportunity to build back better, to take the crisis and through it address some of the enduring concerns that the research has led to. So there was another thing that we were also very aware of. We've been talking about it for about 2 years now, about putting together a national teaching practice platform where students around the country can do some kind of teaching practice in a coherent, collaborative way across the national sector. So that was the challenge, and this boot camp was running for the month of April. And so a group of us from various universities got together with administrative support from JET Education Services. We brought on board SACE, the Basic Education and Higher Education and Training, and started to apply our minds to how could we address this crisis, address some of the concerns, and work towards something that could last beyond COVID. So our starting point was the idea that in practice, they're not always getting the reasons for practice. And, you know, a lot of the research that has informed our thinking about teacher education talks about the importance of not just teachers having the knowledge and the skills to do the work, but actually the ability to reason soundly, to have choices, grounds for their choices, grounds for their actions, for thinking wisely, for being able to make decisions, for being able to choose amongst alternative ways. And not all ways are equally productive in particular contexts. The idea that teaching is not just a matter of your personal preference, but there are principles about why certain things work better in certain contexts than others do, and that those decisions need to be based on professionally justified knowledge and the moral imperatives of being a teacher. And so out of this conceptualization, so the Teacher Choices in Action module was developed. And we decided, I mean, there's no ways we can, in a short time, address all aspects of teaching in its complexity. But what we could do is hone in on the triangle, and you'll see a relationship between the teacher working with diverse learners, the teacher working with knowledge, so that the learners become working with knowledge and thinking with that knowledge. So that was the idea that kind of gave us a starting point. We started with Wayne Hugo's book, Cracking the Code, in which he talks about questions that every teacher has to ask of themselves in every single lesson, but that the answer to those questions would vary enormously and would not be equally appropriate across contexts. So we started with that. And we worked with the idea that in their B.Ed and PGCEs, the student teachers are getting the knowledge and the skills that they need. But maybe it's in the context of practice that they learn to put the parts together. And maybe if we draw their attention to how those parts fit together in the logic of practice, rather than in the logic of university-based coursework, that we would be developing them as knowers who can draw on their knowledge to make informed decisions, responsive, reflective ways of making decisions in their classroom. So the basic underlying premise of the module was who you are, what you teach, who you teach, and where you teach, all inform the decisions that you make in terms of how you teach. So that was the focus of our the module. What did it offer? And we then were able to develop a module called Teacher Choices in Action. It's an online module, although there is a resource book that goes with it that takes the students through the entire module in text for our deaf community students, as well as those with intermittent internet access. It went live on the 17th of August. Currently 24,600 students are doing the module, and those students are drawn from 21 universities and higher education institutions across South Africa. We are developing their idea of thinking in action, and we can't do everything, but that's one of the things we can do, we thought, under the COVID context. And it would supplement those cases where students are left on their own in the classroom, or are simply given tips, or don't really have a guided sense of why lesson planning is more than just paperwork. So there are tutorials that introduce them to the key choices and what are the options and when are those options appropriate or not appropriate. We take them through examples of extracts of lessons or worksheets and so on about how those principles and how those decisions have been made in those lessons, and those are explained to them. So they have a sense of how decisions are enacted in different contexts. We take the students, they see lessons in both township, rural classrooms, suburban classrooms, public schools, private schools, and so on. So I would say that the majority of the lessons that they see have been recorded in rural or township classrooms. And they look at how every teacher is working with the same set of choices, although how it plays out is contextually appropriate. There we've set up forum discussions where students across different Year of Studies, across different institutions, are able to read one another's response about, for example, how they came to enroll in teaching, what their hopes and their fears are of being a teacher, what are the challenges in their context.
5 minutes.
Thank you. We give them tasks to analyze artifacts of practice, but also to do written extended writing tasks. And then later on in the modules, they revisit what they've written earlier on and see if they want to revise, extend, or review what they've written in light of later learning. And we give them ideas of opportunities to reflect on how these decisions might play out in their context, in their phase, in their subject. And so what we have in the module is 6 units where we start with them as a teacher and their hopes, their fears, their beliefs, their assumptions. We look at teacher choices in different contexts, both resourced and under-resourced contexts, face-to-face learning and distance learning, and what choices teachers make in terms of what they have available and what the students have available in those contexts. We look at choices that work with knowledge. We look with choices that promote how the children work with knowledge in terms of their tasks, in terms of the feedback that teachers give, and how teachers promote that kind of learning. The teacher choices for inclusive teaching and teacher choices of how they manage time and space, not necessarily to control children in an authoritarian way as a power-based thing, but rather to maximize the amount of teaching time that's available for them. And where you have the black, those are set programs, set lessons, set tasks. In between each unit, the students can go to a lesson library and look at lesson recordings that are relevant to their own phase and their own subject. And they've got to do analysis of those lessons.
2 minutes.
What we then do is give them a summative assessment in which they consolidate their practice, their understanding of the concepts, their understanding of the choices, and how they revisit some of their written work that they've done already. This then supplements work-based learning in cases where where students can't go to the schools or can't go to the schools for as much time as what was expected in a non-COVID year. So we think that there's a lot of capacity building in this project for the teacher education sector as a whole. So not only has it given the 24,000 students an ability to do a different kind of teaching practice this year, instead of learning in practice, learning from practice, and instead of being immersed in one context, they have had opportunities to look at teaching over many contexts, but with a guided direction. So for the student teachers, we think that they have had an opportunity to share in an experience of analyzing practice across different contexts. The teacher educators have come together to collaborate and learn together on this module, and we will have an opportunity for the tutors across the 21 institutions to give us feedback on what worked and what didn't work, what they valued, what they didn't value about that module, and that will be useful in its piloting in terms of the national platform. We believe that this is going to inform the draft policy on work-based learning, and we think that this has given a unique opportunity to build scholarship in teacher education and to research work-based learning in a way that's never been possible before because of all those contextual variations. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Carol. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I think, yeah, before Carol, I just want to say thank you. And I think that emergency remote research that you were involved with or heading up addressed two major barriers, namely the reductionist view of knowledge and the decontextualized nature of knowledge in teacher education. Thank you. Carol, over to you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Hello, colleagues, and thanks to Lee and Maureen. So what I'm going to do just to finish off or close up our seminar is looking at what are some of the options that we're planning around researching this module. Lee has described it very clearly. And the topic or title is South African Pre-Service Teachers Pedagogical Reasoning on Action. And we've got two kind of prongs to the research that we're planning. The one is to focus on the student teachers as participants and to really, as Lee has said, it's the first time we've got so many thousands of students participating in one particular module, and it really creates a huge amount of potential data for us. So we're interested to look at how do the student teachers in different universities learn from and engage with the module. What kinds of conceptual tools do they recruit when they analyze lessons? So we're asking some of the tasks, as Lee's explained, they'll be analyzing videoed lessons, and we're interested in how they do this, and then to look and to see in what ways does their lesson analysis shift after completing the module. how do they recruit, if they do, different kinds of principles of pedagogy? And what are the differences between student teachers at different stages of their teacher education? How do first-year students engage with the module as opposed to perhaps fourth years or PGCE students? So there's a huge amount of really interesting and important data that we can get. The other set of participants is teacher educators, or the tutors, who are going to be supporting the students through the module. And we're really interested in here is what are their reflections on both the form of the module, but also its substance. What is their engagement around the module content and its underpinning pedagogic principles? And I think what we're hoping the kind of outcomes will be, as Lee has said, will inform policy, but obviously use the findings to strengthen the module. It's something that we're hoping it will not just be offered this year, but is something that will be offered in an ongoing way and will be strengthened. Develop better understandings of how South African student teachers develop pedagogical reasoning. Develop understandings of teacher educators' pedagogic principles and their engagement. And I think develop an understanding, a better understanding of the differences and similarities between teacher education in different higher education institutions. So in terms of the sample, I mean, it's huge. Lee was saying 24,600 students in 21 institutions. So potentially there's a huge amount of data there and about 800 tutors. So just to talk about how we think we're going to generate the data, or how we will, the students, because they're doing this course online, will be doing online assessment tasks as they go throughout the course. Some of these will be formative, some will be summative, some will be analysis on lessons, as I've said, and they'll also be asked to reflect on each of the units and how those are different or similar to their coursework. So something like this, what do you notice between this unit and the coursework you've studied in your own institution? Is there similarity? Is there differences? How can you incorporate the ideas or concepts in this unit? So the data we will get from the students will all be online. It will be essentially the students' e-portfolios, which we will then be able to analyze in a range of different ways. In terms of the teacher educators or tutors, we'll be doing an online qualitative questionnaire, an open-ended questionnaire with all the tutors or teacher educators. So the kinds of things obviously we can do, there's a huge amount of possibilities for comparing levels of students who are in their B.Ed or those who are in their PGCE, students who teach different phases and different school subjects, obviously across institutions, and then teacher educators, some who might be subject specialists, others are teach within education studies. And obviously there's a much greater range of possibilities, but just some ideas. And just to talk about, I guess, as I finish up, how would this develop knowledge building in the field? We know that there's, Lee and Maureen have said, not much research really on the pedagogic practices of student teachers, a lot more on their experiences, their reflections. We know that the way that teacher educators understand what good pedagogy is or good teaching is very different. Often it's tips for teachers that are not underpinned by coherent principles. Sure that we as teacher educators have a very clear theory of pedagogy that we make explicit to student teachers. And if you think about the work of Robin Alexander, where he talks about what is pedagogy, I wonder to what extent we give, I'm not saying this is the only framework, it's clearly not, but something where we make it clear to students, what do we mean? He talks about the core acts of teaching as being task, activity, interaction, and assessment, being framed by particular things like space, pupil organization, time, and curriculum, as well as the routines, rules, and rituals. And I'm wondering, to what extent do we as teacher educators give this kind of principled theory of pedagogy to our student teachers? The module takes a very particular social realist stance, as Lee has mentioned, where we're trying to focus both on the knowledge and the knower. We know that self-knowledge and a theory of oneself is vital for teachers, as well as the kind of knowledge that informs professional judgment. We're drawing on Schulman, we're drawing on Bernstein's understanding of instructional discourse. This particular stance might be different to some other institutions or other teacher educators. So we're really interested to see, as teacher educators, how can we engage and open up conversations around pedagogy, around principles, and create a more coherent set of principles about pedagogy. Is it possible? I think it's desirable. So I think this research is really important, both from the aspect of student teachers and how they develop pedagogical reasoning, and also to give us much greater insight into teacher educators' understandings of pedagogic principles. So if anyone is interested in being involved in the research, Lee is the person to contact. She's going to be the overall project leader of the research. And I will end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carol. And just for me to thank all three presenters for that coherent and organized three-part presentation. Thank you very much. And I think the underlying and underpinning aspect to me is this idea of integration of knowledge, integration of context, and you know, working against the barriers of reductionist thinking and decontextualized ideas within the field, and bringing that together in the logic of practice. So thank you very much for highlighting the research possibilities, the overview which Maureen gave, and Lee's presentation on the actual, what's that? Education researchers respond to COVID-19, building back better, theme 11 presentation. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we can open up for questions, comments, points of clarification at this stage. Please just identify yourself and pose the question either to the presenter or to the panel, depending on the nature of your question.
May I ask a question?
Yes, you're welcome, sir.
I'm Michael van Wyk, here from Pretoria. Thank you for all the three presentations. I heard that this course was conducted over 21 universities. My understanding is, where can we pitch it beyond COVID? Beyond COVID, it means that, will this course be coined into an OER or a MOOC? And how are you understanding that? The reason behind my question or suggestion is the following. There are currently teachers that want to upgrade, or those who are unqualified maybe will have a particular OERs which is totally free. They can redesign it, or a MOOC that is based on a particular assessment practice. And whether this course is credit bearing, that can be coined into an OER or a MOOC. So what is your suggestion on that?
I don't know, Lee, do you want to start, or anybody?
Thank you. Yes, I'll respond to that. So yeah, this started off as a pilot project for DHET in terms of solving the problem now, but it's certainly seen as something that should be continuing in the long term. Certainly for the next 3 years, and then on we will refine as we go along. SACE has expressed huge interest in perhaps adapting something like this as a continuing professional development point, because they said that, you know, sometimes teachers get so bogged down in the admin and the bureaucracy and the complexity of their teaching that they lose sight of the essence of their practice. So actually I've got a meeting with SACE tomorrow to look at whether this might be something that could be extended for in-service teachers, or perhaps even extended into the a next phase into the induction year of students in their first year of newly qualified teachers. So these are possibilities that are on the table, but at the moment, you know, we still first got to see what's the value of this one, where the students have benefited, whether they believe that they've benefited, where how the universities have felt that this has contributed, because there's been no attempt to replicate what's being done in initial teacher education, but it's rather to give the students the opportunity to draw on whatever experience or conceptual resources they have at that point in their teacher development to respond to practice. So it's been a very different way of thinking about it, but yes, there are definitely possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes,
Comments?
sir. Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
I would like to ask from a practical point of view as a tutor in the module that we have here. The expectation is that you'll be having feedback from the tutors. What are the practice? What are the conditions around which, if it is done ideally,
We're losing you. Not sure it's just me, but your sound seems to have disappeared.
The sound?
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Much better.
So I am asking, there are two things. One thing is about it's you comparing first years, second years, and maybe third years and fourth years. So is it like it is supposed to be done by all the students who are in teaching?
I don't know if you're getting that, colleagues.
I think I am. So
Okay.
I think that the question is about how does one give formative feedback to students at different levels of expertise. So we've developed, and it's been put on it's been given to the teaching practice coordinators and the deans and so on, assessment guides and so on, where the rubrics for first and second year students are not going to the high level of theoretically informed practice that the fourth years and PGCEs and third years would be assessed. So those kind of modifications are reflected in the way in the assessment rubric and in the expectations of students. So first year students, for example, won't be doing a rationale for their lesson planning and so on. They would just be doing the description and analysis of practice. Their levels on the assessment rubric, whereas first year students would be based on their basic description and basic ability to analyze what they see, whereas fourth year students would go right up to conceptually informed analysis and interpretation and being able to maybe ask questions and identify dilemmas in what they see. So there are those kind of nuances that have been built into the assessment rubrics that have been made available to the tutors who are looking after students on the module.
Okay, is that fine? Right, Labby, how are we doing for time? Another question or two?
Yes, we've got a few minutes more. We can go about for another 5 minutes.
Okay, I see hands raised. Where were they? Okay, we can go ahead. Whoever is there, I don't see any particular person, but another question?
I'd just like to ask a very short practical question.
Okay, go ahead.
Already we have struggling with the honors students to find enough lesson videos for students to watch and study. And I just wondered how you're going to get the proper variety and level of teaching videos that can be used for this course.
Okay, someone want to respond?
Maybe I need, sorry. Maybe I need to just respond to that as well. So at the moment, we've got about 150 odd lessons in a lesson library. We have got them from various sources. Fundawanda, we've got from Reading to Learn South Africa, we've got from a Mindset channel and so on. We've got also videos that have been recorded in classrooms by members of our team. So what we've got at the moment is a basic start, and we're hoping that over the next 2-3 years, we get more and more options and more lessons added into the library. So as I say, at the moment we've got about 150 in our library. But you know, this is an invitation to the sector that if you have got lessons that would be worth watching and made available to contribute to this, it's a start. We certainly don't have enough arts and culture lessons. We don't have enough life orientation. We don't have any, we don't have too many in the intermediate phase. So all these things are going to be things that we need to build up in the years to come. But we've got enough to get started. Thank you.
Okay, and then I just picked up something in the chat box.
Chris, may I ask a question? It's
go ahead, Murthy.
Well, I want to thank the panel for the presentation. I thought it was really good. And I want to thank the team for putting together the program, you know, with these lessons and the activities around it. But I just want to question, you know, this is akin to someone learning how to swim by watching others swimming and having exposure to good theory, a textbook on how to swim. So at best, it's a second-hand experience, right? So we have to keep that in mind. So I'm going to leave that point. I'll stop that at that point.
Okay, response.
Maybe I can respond. I mean, I think Mercy, you're absolutely right. This module is not mooted to replace school-based teaching practice. It's certainly not a replacement at all. I think it's a supplement to school-based teaching practice. That's my understanding of it. So students would be doing this, but will also be going into schools where that is possible. Obviously, depending on the COVID kind of restrictions this year, but I think certainly in the future, it's seeing this not as a replacement of that.
Sorry, can I add on that? So it's 10 credits out of a possible 50 to 70. So it's 10 out of the many. And they can't do this in every year of their degree. They can do it as a once-off somewhere in their program. So it's a supplement, exactly as Carol says. It's certainly not a replacement, but it does extend the level of mentoring and that we think that many of our students are not getting in the classroom. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, if I could just come in here, I think Murthy's raising an important point there, and as people have mentioned, the supplementary nature of it, because I think you know, there are so many issues related to practice teaching, and I would hope that that we don't forget about you know, so many other issues that have been raised around in the chat around around mentoring, around school conditions, around school subjects, around what I refer to as the felt experience of learning to teach. So I'm hoping that when we go out of this panel that we go with the whole range of issues that will continue to exist forevermore in practice teaching or in work integrated learning, and that we are aware of the complexity, because even as I'm listening to the module, I mean, it's brilliant and it's absolutely fantastic. Questions are coming up for me about, we have to ensure that this is also coherent and well, it is coherent, internally coherent, but how does it relate to the rest of the teacher education program? And I think that's what the research will actually bring out. So yeah, that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I saw a last chat box. How is student behavior dealt with in the course? I take it in the module.
Okay, I think I'll respond to this. So this is absolutely no intention to give a one-stop, one-size-fits-all account of the entire teacher education program. That's not what the intention is. The intention is to focus very specifically on the relationship between the teacher, the diverse learners, the context in what they learn, and what subject is being mediated, and the ways of knowing and being and doing in that subject. How we deal with a little bit of classroom management is in terms of managing space and time that sets a learning space for a classroom space for learning, a safe space in which learning can happen. So definitely in terms of the idea that when you've got something worthwhile to learn and something worthwhile for the children to be doing with that knowledge, that the conditions for your classroom management are far, far better than if you've got nothing for them to learn and nothing useful for them to do. And so, you know, dealing with the specifics of student behavior and so on, that's beyond the scope of this course. It's not aimed to do that, but it does try to say to the students that 90% of classroom management becomes so much easier when your lessons are well planned, well conceptualized, and you've got quality learning for them to engage with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suspect we might be running out of time, Labby.
Chris, can I just make a last comment? It's Erna Lampen.
Go ahead, Erna.
I really think this course has so much potential to create a shared understanding of what we think is meaningful teacher education. So I want to applaud people, but I am worried about the opportunities, and it's just in this instance that I feel I have lost to, as a subject specialist, engage with my final year students around their practice. So while they were tutors, and I think they will be of, that kind of tutor training will be of immense help in the future, us as subject specialists have not had a chance to engage with this course and therefore specialize for our students the knowledge that they have gained and developed. And I hope to, and I'm going to apply to be involved in research to do exactly that. And I think it ties a little bit with Marissa Rolnick's question about instances of lessons that we think is worthwhile to investigate. I do think you need to involve subject specialists, subject specialists there. Thank you.
Thank you, Erna. Okay, Labby.
Yes, I think we should come to a conclusion for this session. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Can I just make a last comment quickly?
Sorry?
Can I just thank the presenters?
Yes. Okay.
I think today's presentation just opened up the space, the whole area to further scrutiny and inquiry, and I think certainly can add value to the whole teacher education arena. Thank you very much, ladies, for your inputs. Okay, Labby, that's it from me.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in this webinar. We really appreciate you spending some time and engaging with us and our speakers. We encourage you to visit our websites. It has been improved sufficiently now to engage with a whole lot of things. We have several platforms in which you could access information, and we'd like you to exploit the opportunities that SAERA will provide in terms of promoting and facilitating research and research engagements, and we encourage you to be part of all of these activities. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. All the best and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you immensely.
Thank you, Labby and Chris.
Thanks, everybody. It was great. Enjoyed it a lot. Thanks for the comments.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.